Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Entering our final segment here, we are going to be talking some college basketball. If you are new to the show here, we're starting to ramp up a little bit more college basketball as we get closer to March Madness, one of the most electric time periods in the sports calendar, in my opinion. And this season has been absolutely nuts. Just top 10. There's this whole storyline going on with top 10 seeds and their struggles with beating unranked teams on the road. They are currently sub 500 against unranked opponents if you are a top 10 team playing against an unranked opponent on the road. So it's been under 500. We had another case of that last season. I don't know what the exact statistics are as of this moment, but it's just so fascinating to watch just how deep the college basketball league is right now. And I guess also just at the top, sort of the lack of true elite powerhouses such as we've seen in the past. So starting at the top here, we had a massive weekend this past weekend as far as top teams in the country go. 4 different matchups between top 10 teams in the country. So we'll be touching a bit on those games as well as the subsequent movement in the polls because of them. Starting off with Saturday, where we had a couple of these top teams participating in these matchups. We had number 2 Purdue face off on the road against number 6 Wisconsin, and we had number 3 UNC face off against number 7 Duke. So starting with this Purdue game here, they came out on top in one of these really competitive games that we've seen in the Big Ten so far this season. They just continue to add to their resume, which is one of the best in the entire country. And then to go out and get this tough win on the road against a top 6 opponent sort of just continues to help them move along in this season. They are very likely to be a 1 seed again. Now, if you remember, they were actually the 1 seed that was upset in March Madness last year when they lost to Fairleigh Dickinson. So they are definitely hoping to redeem themselves. I think that a big part of it is sort of the surrounding pieces definitely being better, whether it's season to season improvement or bringing in a guy like Lance Jones, who has been incredible for them. He was incredible for them in this matchup against Wisconsin, scoring 20 points, plays very good defense. And this is a guy that they got in the transfer portal from Southern Illinois. So he's been awesome to watch. Braden Smith, we talked about in the last episode. He struggled with turnovers in this game against Wisconsin specifically, but also flashed a little bit more of the offensive highs he can have as far as a pure scoring perspective with Purdue. The concern with Purdue is their lack of bench scorers. They really don't get much production at all. I don't think that their bench scored a single point in this game against Wisconsin as a whole. It was something like they went 0 for 4 from the field as I sort of try and check this on the fly, but they're very starter reliant, which is, a fine thing sort of when you are talking about a team that has Zach Edey, probably the best player in the country as far as just college basketball alone stands. And you have some good supplemental is the word I'm looking for. Supplemental pieces such as Braden Smith, Lance Jones, Fletcher Lawyer. But yeah, 2 points from the bench, just 0 for 4 from the field as a whole. So not much bench production for this Purdue squad at all, which is a little bit of a concern. They're not the only team in the current top 5 because things are going to change shortly with the polls, but in the current top 5, not the only team that has that issue. UNC came out and they really controlled Duke for the majority of that game on Saturday night. They rebounded from losing to a sub 500 Georgia Tech team on the road earlier in the week. Again, this narrative that is going on actively about how hard it is for these top 10 teams to win on the road. They end up falling short to Georgia Tech. It was a very disappointing game there, but they bounced back, and again, they just sort of took it to Duke. Now, this wasn't the traditional UNC win from this season. UNC has been a very elite defensive team for just the Tar Heels have been an elite defensive group for a lot of the year. Still good on offense, can still put up points, but it's been smothering other teams. Armando Bacot has been just an absolute enforcer in the interior, and Duke actually put up points on them in this one. They scored 84, which is a considerable amount considering what UNC has been able to do on that defensive side of the floor. So since we talked about them last week to this week, they've now dropped to 7th in Ken Palm's defensive rankings, but obviously still a very good unit, so nothing to overreact about. But in this game against Duke, it was specifically Armando Bacot, who was phenomenal. RJ Davis, those two are the heart and core of this UNC team, providing that seniority, that leadership. Davis didn't have the best game from the field, but he was at least had some timely shots and helped in those big moments. But Harrison Ingram was really impressive in this game. Ingram is probably their best candidate or their best prospect, I should say, for the upcoming NBA draft. He's got a 6'7" frame. He plays a little bit bigger. He played big in this game specifically with a 20-point double-double, 21 points, 13 rebounds. He shot 5 of 9 from 3. He can stretch the floor well. Does so a lot in the catch and shoot, which I think is just about as valuable as anything when you're talking about just playing into a role. It's not that he's necessarily going to lead a franchise at the next level, but I think that he can definitely be a big rotational guy, can hit the shots that he needs to, and continue building on this impressive season that he's been putting out there. Especially, he played well on defense himself in this past game, so was going to be a little bit of a test, I think, this game against Duke. And although Duke sort of pushed them a little bit with their offense, it was the UNC offense responding just as much, and that's what they can do when they need to, when the time calls. Their defense is sort of what they hang their hat on, but it goes even further than that. They can put the ball in the net when they need to, and they did in this game. So this convincing win against a rival in Duke, a top 10 opponent, sort of helped to keep them within the number 3 seed for the updated polls. And that was also because number 4, Houston, from last week, they lost to Kansas that same day on Saturday. So they dropped to number 5, while Kansas jumped up from number 8 to number 4, which I probably would have told you before this show and before last night that was a little bit aggressive. I understand, when you beat the team directly, it's hard to keep you below them, but this game took place at Kansas. The Jayhawks were underdogs at home, which probably never should have been the case. I was sort of kicking myself for not taking the Jayhawks in this game specifically, but they then come out and they beat Houston. They're feeling good about themselves, but this Big 12 that Houston just joined has been just such a force all season long, and Kansas then went to Kansas State last night, their in-state rival, and they end up losing in overtime 75-70. It was a great game, and I think that Kansas is this team I was alluding to that they really struggle with bench production. And that is something that I think is a real concern for them, because for the most part this season it's been their four guys. It's DeJuan Harris, it is KJ Adams, it's Hunter Dickinson, and somehow blanking on this fourth name off the top of my head here, but it's been a lot of their big four guys that have carried the load for them. Kevin McCullough, obviously. I don't know how I forgot that. McCullough, another guy who could very easily see himself in the first round of the NBA draft this upcoming year. And they have recently added Johnny Furphy to their starting lineup. Furphy, a freshman for Kansas, came off the bench to begin the year and has worked his way into the starting lineup. He has been pretty impressive as of late, but last night against Kansas State was really shut down. He struggled from the field, and I think that it's just an example of how this guy is going to be the X factor for this team, because he was turning so many heads when things were going well, and it's not that you can overreact all that much to this one particular loss, but when he doesn't have it and you're pushed into these overtime minutes, you're not getting anything from the bench if you're Kansas, and these other four guys have so much experience that he sort of becomes a little bit of the wild card. How is he going to step up into these hostile environments against tough teams? Kansas State was unranked, but we know how good they can be. They made the Elite Eight last season, and I think that, he's definitely going to be tested if Kansas wants to consider themselves true competitors in this league and in the country as a whole. Because the Big 12, in my opinion, is the best conference in the country. It was last year. Had two teams in the Elite Eight. It was Kansas State, as we just mentioned, and it was Texas. They go on and they add Houston, BYU, UCF, and it was Cincinnati that they all joined the conference this year. All of them are very solid. You have Houston, who is another very likely one seed in the country, and then BYU is ranked within the top 25, currently sitting at 21. So a very talented conference. There's really no breaks for them. Kansas, their next game is against ranked Baylor, so not really going to have any time to have the schedule lighten up or anything. They are going to be tested pretty much here on out. Same with all the Big 12 teams in the country. And then finally, we had Kentucky versus Tennessee, who I mentioned on the show before. Kentucky is a very entertaining team because of the offense that they play, and because they find themselves in a lot of shootouts, because they struggle a lot on the defensive end. They are really floundering right now. They lost in overtime to Florida last week, and now a loss to Kentucky where they allowed 103 points. That's not going to do it in college basketball in regulation. CBS's Matt Norlander gave a stat that I found interesting, and that is Barnes, the head coach for the Tennessee Volunteers, is now 7-1 versus Kentucky when Kentucky is ranked within the top 10. So we're seeing this sort of rejuvenated Tennessee program. It wasn't even Dalton Connect's game on Saturday when they ended up playing and putting up as many points as they did against Tennessee. You had Ziegler, who's been big for them this year. He scores 26. And you have Josiah Jordan-James scoring 26 as well. So that defense is not going to cut it. They've been really struggling as of late, and I don't think that they're necessarily a March Madness true contender, but I will continue to be watching them because of all the NBA prospects that they have on their team, and I think that we're going to see a little bit of a free fall here, but they should be sticking around in March. They got to figure out what's going on, though. Big Z, Avicic, he finally got his eligibility just a few weeks ago, and now he's getting DNPs, not even playing against a top 10 ranked opponent in Tennessee. So they have a lot of stuff that they have to figure out going forward. But we're still in early February here. There is a lot of time for them to try and figure this out. But that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We'll see you then.